the complications that we have most often in our institute are obstetric anal sphincter injuries, like Dr. Chandrasekhar has said.
Yeah.
Instrumental deliveries, most often we are having, most of them, the most common complication is obstetric anal sphincter injuries, followed by cervical tears. Thankfully, in my last 12 years of practice, I have not seen any supraelevator hematomas. But cervical tears, fornicial tears, all this we have seen, very rare, but most often is obstetric anal sphincter injuries.
Yes, because the supraelevator hematoma is very dangerous. There is the one which is causing deaths and the sudden postpartum collapse, unexplained hypertension, etc.
It has been documented. It has been seen that these are found when we apply instrument at undilated cervix.
Yes, yes.
So we should avoid doing that.
Yeah. Thank you, Anisha. Excellent presentation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Kasturi ma'am, and thank you, Vidya ma'am, for chairing these sessions. Now we move to our next session on PPH and obstetrician's nightmare.
A very good afternoon to everyone.
One second, ma'am. Yeah. For all those just joining us, you have logged into the National E-Conference on Labor and Birth, organized by the Department of KVG Medical College and Hospital, Sulya. So we move on to the second session of the day. We have 3 talks for this session. The first talk is by Dr. Rekha Ratnani. Chairing this session will be Dr. Swati Agarwal, Associate Professor and Nodal Officer, GSSK and Lakshya, Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Lady Hardinge Medical College and SSK Hospital, New Delhi. Ma'am has over 40 publications in national and international journals to her credit. She was a university topper in final year MBBS and she has been awarded various prestigious awards by FOGSI. Welcome, ma'am. The coordinator for this talk is our own Dr. Veena N, Senior Resident, Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, KVG Medical College and Hospital. I would like Dr. Swati Agarwal to introduce our speaker and take over the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. It is my great pleasure to be a part of this wonderful conference, and I thank the organizers, Dr. Geeta and Dr. Bhavya, for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this wonderful conference. This next topic that we are going to deal with is a very, very important topic. It's a must-know skill for every obstetrician, and it is, in true sense, a nightmare. For every obstetrician, all the obstetricians about how to go about managing this complication. And to give a talk on this very important subject, I have my great pleasure of inviting a very esteemed speaker, Dr. Rekha Ratnani. Dr. Rekha is presently the professor and head of the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at SSIMS Bhilai, also head of IVF and endoscopy unit at High Tech Super Speciality. She is the ex-professor and head at CCM Medical College, Durg, and has had held various senior positions in various other hospitals. She has many publications and presentations to her credit. She's been an examiner for MBBS and MD courses for the last 10 years and has been the past president of the Durg Obs and Gynae Society, as well as past secretary of the Raipur Obs and Gynae Society. So without further ado, I hand over to Dr. Rekha Ratnani to begin her talk. Dr. Rekha, please.
Thank you so much for my kind introduction. I would also like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Yes, you're absolutely right that it is an obstetrician's nightmare. PPH is something which I believe has caused a lot of anxiety in our mind one day or the other during our obstetric career. And all pregnancies, even if they are So all pregnancies are at risk of PPH, even if no predisposing factors are present. We really are stuck many a times in cases where we believe that nothing wrong would do. And when we say that it is around 2 lakh women who die from PPH every year, I think we are grossly underestimating it, because our best estimate is definitely a gross underestimate, especially when PPH is concerned. The paradox is that, when we look at the data from developing countries, we see that, deaths because of pregnancy-related are much less. Like pregnancy-related mortality ratio in US is only 17.3 per 1 lakh live births. But when we look at developing world like ours, there are many countries who have more than 1,000 women deaths per 1 lakh live births. So why is PPH a concern? We all know it is very important topic, and WHO estimates that of all the maternal deaths which are occurring every year, around 25% of it take place in India. And nothing, it is nothing that we should be proud about, because it is accounting to nearly 1/4 of all maternal deaths all over the world. We do face PPH in about 5% of all deliveries. And the worst thing is that the death occurs within 4 hours of the delivery, indicating that it is a consequence of 3rd stage of labor. Now, we know that diagnosis of PPH is usually reserved for pregnancies that have progressed more than 20 weeks. Coming to the definition, loss of blood more than 500 ml from the genital tract post-delivery of a baby in case of vaginal delivery, and more than 1,000 ml after cesarean delivery, or maybe excessive pervaginal bleed that causes hematocrit drop more than 10% that require immediate transfusion. These are the definitions which we read, but actually it is arbitrary and very, very problematic. Because, when we look at estimate of blood loss, it is very subjective and generally inaccurate. The studies suggested that caretakers, they consistently underestimate the actual blood loss. Another proposal suggests using a 10% fall in hematocrit value to define PPH. But again, this change is dependent on the timing of the test and the amount of the fluid resuscitation which we have given. More importantly, I think the diagnosis would be retrospective, perhaps useful for research, but not so in the clinical setting. We are so shocked at the amount of blood loss which we are seeing that it hardly, comes to our mind that let us see what is the blood loss and then treat accordingly. Also, another important factor is the differing capacity of individual patients to cope up with this blood loss. A healthy woman, we all know, has 30 to 50% increase in blood volume in a normal singleton pregnancy, and she's much more tolerant of blood loss than a woman who has pre-existing anemia or underlying cardiac disease or volume contracted condition secondary to dehydration or preeclampsia. So for these reasons, various authors have suggested that PPH should be diagnosed with any amount of blood loss that threatens the hemodynamic stability of the woman. Now, frequency. The frequency of PPH is directly related to the management of 3rd stage of labor. Now, we know that this 3rd stage of labor will be starting from completed delivery of the baby until the complete delivery of the placenta. Data from several sources, including several large randomized trials performed in industrialized countries, indicate that, in countries, in places where active management of labor was practiced, they were able to bring down the incident to 5% versus when, it was 13% when nothing was used. Our prevalence rate of PPH of more than 1,000 ml was reduced to 1% when active management was practiced versus 3% when expectant management was used. Now, again, the question is why PPH is more rampant in developing countries. One of the reasons can be lack of widespread availability of the medications which are used in the active management of 3rd stage. because we know that the same drugs which we are using for prevention or prophylaxis against PPH are actually going to help us again in the management of PPH. There can also be lack of experienced caregivers who might be able to successfully manage PPH if it occurred. We all know that at PHCs or primary healthcare centers, there is scarcity of doctors or trained health workers, and which can be a major contributory factor. Then coming to blood transfusion facilities, we all know that blood banks are not that frequently being attached to the primary health centers or at the primary healthcare level. So comorbidities, if they are already there, suppose patient is already pre-eclamptic, anemic, which we know that they are more common in Indian population. These are the patients who are actually going to fall prey to PPH because their tolerance to blood loss would be much less. So on an average, we can divide them into two types. You all know primary PPH and secondary PPH. Primary PPH, we know it occurs within 24 hours, and secondary is after 24 hours to 12 weeks actually after delivery. So when do we call a primary PPH to be minor PPH or a major PPH? If it is between 500 to 1000 ml with no clinical shock, we say that it is a minor primary PPH. And if it is more than 1000 ml, definitely it is a major primary PPH. Now, why bleeding occurs? We know that the placenta, which is removed, it relieves behind a 20 centimeter diameter wound that continues to bleed if uterine musculature does not contract and stay contracted, especially in cases of atonic PPH. Now, how much time do we have? Sadly, we don't have much time because it is going to give us only 2 hours in which we can actually save the patient, or we might fail to save that patient. And it is too less a time to act. So in a way, we can say that PPH is a nice way of saying that we let women bleed to die. Actually, if you don't do anything, you can easily see that patient passing in front of your eyes. Visual blood loss estimation often underestimates, as I emphasized, and more accurate methods would be blood collection drapes or weighing swabs. Now, coming to assessment of blood loss, it is very, very difficult, but yes, we have to do it in spite of the fact that it may be inaccurate. So there was this study which said that after simulated vaginal delivery, there was 16% underestimation at 300 ml loss, whereas this increased to 41% underestimation when the blood loss was more than 2 liters. Accurate methods such as blood collection drapes for vaginal deliveries, weighing of soaked swabs, active periodic estimation, a written and pictorial guide to aid visual estimation in labor wards may actually prime the students and the staff so that, on a daily basis, on a routine basis, they would learn to estimate this loss. So on a shorter note, I can just give a small diagram where it is like if a pad is fully soaked, it means it is 120 cc blood which she has lost. And if it is a large abdominal pack, somewhere around 450 cc blood which she must have lost. We should also remember to define massive obstetric hemorrhage, which is variably defined as blood loss from uterus or genital tract. If it is more than 1500 ml, or a decrease in hemoglobin of more than 4 gram%, or acute loss requiring more than 4 units of packed cells, or any hemorrhage which is associated with hemodynamic instability. We all know we cannot forget to our students to forget these 4 T's: tone, tissue, trauma, and thrombin. Uterine atony, which contributes the first and the most common factor for atonic PPH, is basically one of the major reasons for PPH. It can be secondary to uterine hyperdistension. As we all know, it can be because of a macrosomic baby, or due to multiple pregnancies, previous PPH, or maybe even because of prolonged labor. We should not forget that many a times the drugs which we use, halogenated as anesthetic agents, nitrates, NSAIDs, Maxulf, Duodenolons and all, Nifedipine, which we give for, as tocolytics, we should not forget that they do add to the atony. Recent data has definitely now said and ruled out that grand multiparity is not an independent risk factor for PPH. PH is, yes, associated with obesity, and they said that as the BMI increases more than 40, the risk was 5.2% with normal delivery and 13.6% with instrumental delivery. Other causes include placental implantation site in the lower uterine segment. It can be secondary to, endometritis, endomyometritis, septicemia. It can be because of, hypoperfusion, hypoxia, or cuvalier uterus after abruptios, hypothermia due to massive resuscitation, or even if it is exteriorized for a longer time during cesarean section. Then coming to tissue, I think the most important factor would be retained placenta. Retention of a portion of placenta is more common if, there has been a succensurate placenta and a lobe has been retained there. If we have not been very careful while going through our sonographies. And it has been seen that, it is more common if the patient has delivered before 24 weeks, the chances of retained placenta are more. And it is more common in cases even if they are spontaneous or induced, but they are less than 28 or 24 weeks. Now, recent trials say that if you use misoprostol for second trimester termination of pregnancy, it will decrease retention of placenta compared to techniques which were using, intrauterine instillation of prostaglandins or hypertonic saline. Trauma, we know that it causes around 5 to 10% of cases. Most common, it can be because of vacuum or forceps, as my previous speaker emphasized nicely. Cesarean section, yes, I would emphasize on this also, because cesarean delivery results in twice the average loss, we all know. But remember, when the incision is given in the poor contractile lower segment, it bonds to tear off very easily if it has thinned out. So I think PGs must have noticed in especially one previous section or two previous sections, or when it is about to rupture, or it is it has given away, and when you want to suture these scars, they are very difficult. They just tear apart and they keep on bleeding in spite of these sutures are given. So there has to be a technique which has to be taught well during the PGs, where because the upper segment, upper incision layer is thicker and the lower flap is very thin. There is vasospasm and clotting for hemostasis, which does affect. I will also emphasize about the episiotomies. When episiotomies are given in the early, by early students or the fresh students, many times it just extends if not proper support is given in the perineum, or if no proper flexion of head is maintained during vaginal delivery, and head just comes up and extends out. So there are these periurethral tears which are very common if our freshers are taking the deliveries. Uterine rupture, again, in a poor setting, in a rural setting, yes, we do overcome this problem very frequently in our setup also. We should also never forget to go through a detailed history, because the patients who have undergone myomectomy surgeries or uteroplasties for congenital abnormalities, or corneal and cervical ectopic resections, or perforation of uteruses during dilatation and curettage biopsies, they do cause retained placenta. I have a patient in my department ward right now with retained placenta. She has only history of 2 abortions, and in those 2 abortions she had undergone dilatation and evacuation, and we have now put her for methotrexate, and hopefully she'll do well. But yes, we shouldn't forget that these are the patients who can create problem. Trauma after very prolonged and vigorous labor, especially if patient has relative or absolute CPD, or if she has been stimulated with syntocinon or prostaglandins for very long, they do cause traumatic vaginal deliveries. Trauma may also result as secondary to attempts to remove a small bit of placenta which is remained there, if you try to remove it manually or with some instrument. So you should be very, very careful while doing that. And if there is a retained placenta after the baby has been expelled, I think all of you must be knowing it, and it is very practical to go for intra-umbilical vein saline or oxytocin or saline misoprostol injection, which can prevent you to remove it manually. Cervical lacerations are very common. I will not go into details because this has been taken care of by my previous speaker. Vaginal side wall lacerations, yes, it is very common secondary to forceps. If the forceps is not locked properly, if it is not a proper outlet forceps, if it has been applied little early and then you try to pull it out, it is going to cause massive vaginal side wall lacerations, and they can actually extend in the lower uterine segment also. I have seen it happening during my, when my PGs apply it. So we have to be very, very careful while applying forceps. Yes, you all know that abnormalities can be pre-existent or acquired. Thrombocytopenia may be related to pre-existing diseases if she is having idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, or it can be secondary if she is a patient of HELLP syndrome. So we have to keep eyes open, and we have to have a high suspicion of PPH if this patient is having abruptio, or if she is going towards DIC or sepsis. Yes, we will be troubled by her because she might go into PPH after delivery. So coming to one of the causes which I'll be highlighting, that would be uterine atony, and PPH in a previous pregnancy is a major risk factor, and every effort should be made to determine its severity and cause. In a recent trial in US, birth weight, labor induction, augmentation, chorioamnionitis, max self use, and previous PPH were actually, they said that these are the major causes of PPH if you want to elaborate. Now coming to the prevention, we have to identify the risk factors that may present antenatally or intrapartum period will help us to plan the delivery. As I said previously in my opening statement, that most of the cases of PPH have no identifiable risk factors. But yes, the major thing, one thing which we can really emphasize is that active management of third stage of labor will lower the maternal blood loss and reduce the risk of PPH. Active management of third stage, I won't go into the details because it was taken care very well by my speaker yesterday. But yes, we have to again re-emphasize use of uterotonics, uterine massage, and control contraction. I would definitely like to add few slides, because when I was listening to my previous speaker yesterday, that was WHO recommendations 2012, but there are few changes in recommendation of WHO in 2018. So I thought I should speak about it. Now, the latest 2018 recommendation has said that for prevention, you can go for 10 international units, IV or IM. Carbetocin, which yesterday speaker told us very nicely, it can be used, but it is because it is heat stable. It can be kept above like 30, more than 30 degrees temperature, but it is costly and it is still not available in India. Misoprostol, I want to emphasize that previously it was 600 micrograms, but the various studies have said that it gives good result for prevention if we use it only 400 micrograms. So this is something which we can practice. They have said that if still you don't have these drugs, then use of ergometrin 200 micrograms IM/IV. If you rule out all the contraindications like hypertension, anemia, and cardiac diseases, you can go for it. Or even combination of oxytocin and symptometrin can be used for prevention. There is definitely no for injectable prostaglandin F2 alpha, that is carboprost, for prevention of PPH. But they said that in settings, how would you decide? So they said that in settings where multiple oxytocin agents are available, go for the showstopper, which is oxytocin. But in settings where you know that injectables cannot be kept in proper temperatures, then definitely you should ask for misoprostol as a second degree, because it can be easily used by skilled health personnel and it is very cheap. So recommendations for prevention of PPH regarding cord management and uterine massage, they are very clear. They say that where the skilled birth attendants are available, who know how to do it, please teach them control cord traction, because if you are able to actively manage the third stage, definitely control cord traction is going to help. But they say that if skilled health birth attendants are not available, they say please Do not ask them to go for control cord traction because it is in fact going to cause more harm. Coming to late cord clamping, they said universally it has been recommended that you have to clamp the cord late after 1 to 3 minutes after birth, and it has got strong recommendation. Early cord clamping less than 1 minute after birth is not recommended until and unless the neonate is asphyxiated and you really want to move that neonate to the resuscitation room. Sustained uterine massage is not recommended as an intervention to prevent PPH who have already received prophylactic oxytocin. But yes, you have to keep on putting your hand on her abdomen to find out whether the uterine tone is maintained or not. So control cord traction is regarded as safe, and it says that the average reduction of blood loss is around 11 ml, and the duration of third stage of labor has been reduced by 6 minutes. And if you want to use ergot alkaloids like methargine for prevention of PPH, then CCT, that is control cord traction to minimize placental retention, is regarded as essential because otherwise it will cause retention of placenta. There is insufficient evidence to determine the benefit or risk of control cord traction when used in conjunction with misoprostol. Now coming to recommendations for prevention of PPH in cesarean section, again it is same, oxytocin IV or IM, strongly recommended. Cord traction is strongly recommended for the removal of placenta in cesarean section. So it has to be control cord traction during cesarean section also. Now, remarks, they said in terms of blood loss, there was not enough evidence to recommend oxytocin infusion over IV bolus injection. So to avoid adversely hemodynamic effects considered, if an IV bolus injection is used, a slow injection rate is preferred and a rapid injection rate should be avoided. The combination of oxytocin infusion after an initial IV bolus after cesarean delivery reduces the need for additional uterotonic agents. Carbetocin is more expensive than oxytocin, but it is definitely better. Now coming to management of PPH, yes, communication, resuscitation, then monitoring, investigation, and arrest the bleeding. Communication, very, very important. You should alert all the relevant professionals, all the HODs, all the unit heads, whoever is available, just call for help. A major PPH can be averted if you activate a red alert or if you activate the entire team. Call the team of experienced gynecologists. If you're practicing privately, call all your friends, call team of anesthetists, alert OT team, inform blood bank, ask them to be ready with blood and FFP, delegate one member to keep minute-to-minute record of vitals and blood loss. Very important, never forget, communicate with patient and family members with clear information on what is happening. Do not forget the ABC of resuscitation. The measurement of resuscitation depends on the condition and degree of shock. Assess the airway and breathing. Give oxygen 10 to 15 liters per minute with face mask regardless of maternal SpO2. If airway is compromised due to impaired conscious level, need to intubate with anesthetic assistance. Evaluate circulation. Remember, 2 wide bore cannulas, 14 or 16 gauge, you have to put. If there is PPH, you have to put 2 wide bore cannulas, gray or green color, not pink or blue. Take 20 ml of blood for blood count, coagulation profile, RFT, LFT, fibrinogen, grouping cross-matching for 4 units stat. Position the patient flat, give a lateral tilt, keep the patient warm, catheterize the patient, give crystalloid infusion, that is Hartmann solution. And in major PPH, transfuse blood as soon as possible. Now, until blood is available, total volume of 3.5 liters as we teach, crystalloid infuse up to 2 liters of warmed crystalloid Hartmann solution, Ringer. You have to give around 2 liters. And about 1 to 1.2 liters of colloid as rapidly as required if blood is still not available. You may require disseminated intravascular regime, that is 4 units of FFP for every 4 units of Paxil, or if her PT or APTT is more than 1.5 that of the control, or if platelet is less than 50,000, you have to give platelet concentrates. If fibrinogen level is less than 1 gram per liter, then you have to transfuse cryoprecipitate also. Aim is to restore both blood volume and oxygen carrying capacity. Volume replacement must be undertaken on the basis that blood loss is often grossly underestimated. I would again emphasize that. Now, the therapeutic goals of the management of massive blood loss is to maintain hemoglobin more than 8 gram%, platelet count at least 75,000, PT should be less than 1.5 that of the control. APTT should also be less than 1.5 times that of the control. And fibrinogen, you have to maintain it more than 1 gram per liter. Now, role of recombinant factor 7A therapy. It is used in treatment of hemophilias. It is used in reducing the bleeding in PPH. In life-threatening PPH and in consultation with a hematologist, you can think about it. Dose is 90 micrograms per kg. Now, role of antifibrinolytic drugs, there is definitely role of tranexamic acid in obstetric hemorrhage. Now, there was this CRASH-2 trial in 2010. The CRASH-2 trial showed that tranexamic acid reduced death due to bleeding with no apparent increase in vascular occlusive events. Subgroup analysis showed that tranexamic acid was only effective when given within 3 hours of injury. In 2012, WHO guidelines recommended that tranexamic acid should be used for the treatment of PPH when uterotonics fail to control the bleeding or when the bleeding is thought to be due to trauma. The evidence of this recommendation was extrapolated from trials in surgery and trauma, showing that it is a safe option. Now, coming to the women trial, in which they underwent the efficacy and safety of tranexamic acid in PPH, patients were randomly allocated to receive 1 gram of tranexamic acid or placebo by slow IV injection, and investigators were advised to give 1 gram in either in 100 ml of saline of tranexamic acid intravenously at a rate of about 1 ml per minute. And if bleeding continued after 30 minutes or it stopped and restarted after 24 hours of the first dose, a second dose of 1 gram of Texakyne or tranexamic acid was given, or placebo was given. So what was the conclusion? The results supported the inclusion of tranexamic acid in WHO treatment guidelines for primary PPH. It supported, but it suggested that treatment should be given as soon as possible after onset. Now, coming to WHO recommendations 2018 for the treatment of PPH, they clearly say that it has to be intravenous oxytocin. It is nothing but IV oxytocin alone is the recommended uterotonic drug for the treatment of PPH. Strong recommendation and moderate quality evidence. If intravenous oxytocin is unavailable, or if the bleeding does not respond to oxytocin, the use of IV ergometrin or oxytocin ergometrin fixed dose or a prostaglandin drug, including sublingual misoprostol 800 micrograms is recommended. The use of isotonic crystalloids is recommended in preference to use of colloids for the initial IV fluid resuscitation of women with PPH. The use of tranexamic acid is recommended for the treatment of PPH if oxytocin and other uterotonics fail to stop bleeding, or if it is thought that bleeding may be partly due to trauma. Now, coming to monitoring and investigations, take 20 ml of blood, I told as previously. Monitor her BP and pulse rate every 15 minutes if it is minor. Continuously, if monitor BP, pulse rate, respiratory rate in major PPH. Use oximeters, cardiac monitors, automated BP recordings. Put a Foley's catheter to monitor the urinary output, as well as we put it in immediately as soon as patient is having bleeding. Anesthetic management, yes, we need an anesthetist by our sides because we need to assess, we need to initiate and continue resuscitation. So anesthetist by our side is always a great help to restore the intravascular volume and provide an adequate anesthesia. Even if there is a mild cardiovascular instability, then definitely it is a relative contraindication to regional anesthesia. And then blockage of sympathetic system can potentially lead to worsening hypotension. So general anesthesia is more appropriate. Ventilator with good oxygen, high oxygen concentration should be by your side. Arrest. So arresting the bleeding depends on the cause of the bleeding. Commonest cause, as you all know, is uterine atony, and we need to arrest the bleeding by mechanical means, pharmacological means, or surgical means. Mechanically, yes. Bimanual uterine compression to stimulate uterus to contract. Yes, we should do it. Everybody knows it. It should be taught in during undergraduate teaching also, or it should be taught in PG teaching very well. What about the recommendations 2018? Yes, WHO says uterine massage is recommended for the treatment of PPH. Coming to aortic compressions, if she's bleeding and you want some time before shifting her, or you want to do some arrangements and you want to stop the blood flow, yes, recommendations are that use of external aortic compression for treatment of PPH due to atony after vaginal birth is recommended as a temporizing measure until appropriate care is available. Non-inflatable anti-shock garments. Use of non-pneumatic anti-shock garments as per WHO recommendation 2018 as a temporizing measure until appropriate care is available. Weak recommendation. Pharmacologically, we know that we use IM Synto, then we repeat, but recommendations are very, very clear that for IV oxytocin. So WHO recommendations, again, I would emphasize IV oxytocin alone is the recommended uterotoxic drug as first drug of treatment for PPH. Then I have again told you that if it is, not responding, then you can go for combinations or go for sublingual 800 micrograms. Now coming to if placenta is not expelled spontaneously, then definitely I had mentioned this previously also, treatment of retained placenta. In this you can go for prostaglandin E2 alpha for the management of retained placenta, but it is not recommended. And whenever you feel there is retained placenta, don't forget to give a single dose of antibiotics. Packing recommendation is absolutely no recommendation for uterine packing after birth for atony. Now coming to surgery, if pharmacological management is failed and you don't have time because you have to really rush and keep on trying one after the other. So it depends on the circumstances and the amount of bleed or the time which the patient is giving you. If the pharmacological management is not responding, just shift to the balloon tamponade. There are various methods. The Bakri balloon, it is very costly. We don't use it in our setup. But yes, we use CG balloon. If time will permit, I will show you the video also. It has been named CG balloon after Chhattisgarh, my state. It has been made by one of my colleagues in my previous medical college, Dr. Nalini Mishra and her team. It is very, very helpful. I ask all my PGs, I keep it ready in my OT all the time because we really don't know when we might require it. So it is a must in your tray. It is basically very good because it gives you a tamponade test also, like after you connect it with a Eurobag, and if there is no bleeding inside after inflating, you say that test is positive. That means you are able to control the PPH. But if it is blood keeps on coming from in the Eurobag, you say it is a negative test because it is not being controlled and it is not being helpful. Now, no evidence of how long the balloon tamponade should be kept in place. Most cases, 4 to 6 hours of tamponade is adequate. It should be removed during daytime hours with presence of appropriate senior staff, as further intervention may be necessary. Now, if a woman does not respond to treatment using Uteronics, as I told you, the recommendation by WHO are that use of intrauterine balloon is recommended. Very weak recommendation, low quality evidence, but yes, after Uterotonics, it is the second line of management. If these measures fail, then definitely we have to go for uterine artery embolization. If you have it, I have it in my college, so I can easily boast about this facility that uterine artery embolization can be done. We have done it in one case right now. So it is, it is a boon if your college has a cath lab with you or, this machine with you. It is useful in situations in which preservation of fertility is desired when surgical options have been exhausted in controlling PPH, which is atonic or traumatic. Major drawback is that you really need a 24-hour availability of interventional radiologist or a cardiologist with the entire team to transfer the patient to cath lab. We do it through femoral route approach by injecting the gelatin particles. Use of polyvinyl alcohol particle is actually permanent. Success rates are very high, say 75 to 100%. Complication can be local hematoma at the site, that is femoral site. There can be ischemic phenomena, including uterine necrosis, although rare. Emergency indications are persistent atonic PPH and surgical complications like uterine tears and bleeding following hysterectomy. Now, in elective cases, you can do it when you are suspecting a case to be of placenta accreta or previous cesarean scars which have been diagnosed. So in those cases, you can try. We have not done that. And the strategy used for elective cases in minimizing blood loss, number of blood transfusion, ICU admission, incorporate placement of balloon catheters within the internal artery or uterine artery, which works with balloon inflation. And if it doesn't, then it can be a route for embolization as well. Now, coming to surgical management, if it doesn't stop after embolization also, then they say that if bleeding does not stop in spite of uterotonics and other conservative interventions, use of surgical intervention is recommended. So this is the fourth line of management after the first three which I have mentioned. First and foremost, if we have opened the case, we have to go for stepwise devascularization of uterus. I teach all my PGs, when they go for their cesarean sections, I tell them during my first or second surgery, I teach them uterine artery ligations because they should know all the surgeries before leaving the hospital after completing their PGs, because they can save lives. So stepwise devascularization of uterus is a must. You all are well versed. First of all, it is the uterine artery which we ligate, and if it doesn't stop, then we go a little lower and go for cervicovaginal artery, and if it doesn't stop, then we go and give a higher suture upwards for the anastomotic branch of ovarian artery. These are again the same diagrams: suture 1, suture 2, suture 3. Again here suture 1, here it is given, again here it is given. Now, Beal suture is such a boon. It is a great boon. Everybody, every single postgraduate student passing out from the institute should learn Beal suturing. It is given in YouTube. You should take a purse, a small pouch, a purse or a portly, which we call it, and you should keep on practicing on it. It is given in YouTube. It is very simple, but you should know how to give a Beal suture if you are going for a cesarean section. You should know how to go for Beal suture. It is little, the incision has to be open. It is more often used in cases of cesarean where you have already opened the lower uterine segment, in which you have a lower flap. You go from the lower flap, you can take it and go upstairs, come from behind. It is little difficult if I tell you like this, but if you see the video or if you practice it, it is very easy. What I teach my students is a modified Bealage. I teach them frequently. I also teach them while doing hysterectomies in patients of normal hysterectomies. I teach them all the ligations, because as it is, I'm going to remove the uterus. So that is the best time where I can demonstrate all the sutures. But while doing a cesarean section, when there is a little atony and when I'm about to do modified Bealage, I ask all my PGs to come and wash, or I tell them to learn, because it is very simple. Yes, you have to take a round body needle, a big one, and number 2 catgut, chromic catgut, which I usually use. It has been recommended number 1 also. I don't use that because it breaks easily. I don't use Vicryl because it may cause necrosis, because it gives very tight suturing. So just you have to go anterior-posteriorly, come upward, and just fold the uterus and then give a nice tie, hold it with the artery, and then again take a second suture, go posteriorly, come up, and then give a tie upward. Hold it with the artery. By the meantime, when you are folding the uterus, this knot gets loosened up. So you have to again open the artery, tighten it up, again put the artery there, and again by this time this loosen up. So again tighten it up and fold further. So you have to keep on doing this till you are able to give nice sutures at the fundus. Now I came across this MY suture, Matsubara Yano suture, which I was not doing it, but I feel that it is very good, because what happens when we are giving these two sutures, modified Beelage, they tend to slip off. They tend to slip off from the Cornwall ends. So this MY suture just takes the help of these two transverse sutures, 2 or 3, and it prevents them from falling off. And Cho square sutures, they are very important. Multiple square sutures where a needle transfixes the uterus from anterior to posterior and then from posterior to anterior, and it is done such a way that these squares are formed. They are very important for preventing the bleeding in cases of atonic PPH. I came across this suture. I have never used it. It is Pereira suture, where they are going, they use the needle and the suture material. They don't go inside the cavity, but they just go serosa, and little bit of myometrium is taken, and they take these running sutures vertically and transversely, and they try to use it for constricting the uterine cavity, or making the uterus tonic. So it is unique that in this the needle does not enter the uterine cavity. The uterus is wrapped up by several transverse and longitudinal continuous sutures. The needle picks up the uterine serosa, subserous myometrium, making several bites, and finally the thread is placed in a circular fashion around the uterus. This is the first transverse circular suture, and it has to be repeated 2 or 3 times. This is how it looks after we apply the Pereira suture. Coming to internal artery ligation, a must for all the PGs who are leaving this hospital after taking their before taking their MD degree. I make it a point. I always tell my colleagues, whenever we take a patient for Bardheim cystectomy, when the anatomy is extremely clear, that is the time when your PGs or your UGs should be called. They should be asked to wash, and we should show them clearly. We should take out the fear from their mind about these arteries and vessels. Open the broad ligament between the round ligament and the infundibulopelvic ligament. Identify the psoas muscle. Clearly, you can see the external iliac artery. You can clearly see the uterine artery. You can very well see the ureter in the posterior leaf of the broad ligament. Just slip it away. See that internal iliac artery is giving 2 branches, the anterior and the posterior. We are not bothered about the posterior branch because it is going to give parietal branches. It is the anterior branch which we are worried, which we are going to tackle. Just with the help of mixture, you have to take the suture and tie it. As it is about to give the branches, you have to tie it here. So role of internal iliac artery ligation is to control the intractable pelvic hemorrhage. It was described long back in 1893 in cases of cervical cancer cases. It is a life-saving procedure for PPH bleeding, and it is also you can do it in selected cases as an option during intraperitoneal bleeding where exact location could not be identified. So, bilateral internal artery ligation is much better because it is seen to prevent the blood loss by 49% and pulse pressure by 85%. And after bilateral ligation in long-term period, the collateral circulation will be maintained by refunctioning of the internal iliac artery. There is defemoral artery which is going to supply it, and it is going to take care of the vasculature. Ovarian artery will also give some blood flow to the uterus. So in spite of the bilateral ligation of internal iliac artery, future reproductive potential is not affected totally, and term pregnancy have also been reported. So, this is how you can just open the ligament. It is a cadaveric dissection. You all must, talk to the faculties in the college, all the colleges, and you should ask the PGs to internal iliac artery in cadavers. There are many colleges who are doing it. So I like this diagram very much. This is common iliac. This is external, this is internal, and here beautifully you can see this uterine artery going here. And this is the point where you have to take the suture. Now, one slide about secondary PPH. It can be because of endometritis. It can occur after 24 hours till 12 weeks. Patient can come to you with bleeding. There can be many factors for endometritis. She may be an anemic patient, diabetic, chorionitis, or we have done some intervention to her. It was maybe MRP or forceps, vacuum, cesarean. We have to be very, very clear what is the cause of infection. Swabs should be sent, and good antibiotics, and then later on I'm very sure that once it is taken care of, we can handle secondary PPH. Now I have not discussed hysterectomy as the last option, because most of the time after practicing all these things, very few cases are there who would be requiring hysterectomy. I would emphasize again and again that if you are finding the uterus to be tonically contracted and patient is still bleeding, and you have tried everything till internal iliac artery, and now you are going for hysterectomy after ruling out her DIC, her thrombin being a cause, see that you go for total hysterectomy. I see here patients refer to me in shock, in which the referring doctors have done hysterectomy, but they have done subtotal hysterectomy. They have not done total hysterectomy, which is not going to serve the purpose. And for all the patients, all the students who have not done total hysterectomy, they should not be ashamed to call their seniors to come and help them if they have to take this, because nowadays with so much of litigation, each and every obstetrician should know all the methods of prevention, treatment of PPH. May it be anything, you should be well versed with all the methods. So I would again conclude my slide. I don't know, someone is just writing on my slide. Conclusion is that postpartum hemorrhage is common, and it can occur in patients without risk factors for hemorrhage. Active management of third stage of labor should be used routinely to reduce its incidence. Use of oxytocin after delivery of anterior shoulder is the most important and effective component. Oxytocin is more effective than misoprostol for preventing and treating uterine atony. Routine episiotomy should be avoided to decrease blood loss and risk of anal lacerations. Appropriate management of PPH requires prompt diagnosis and treatment. I always tell that PPH is like house on fire. Don't try to, treat that fire with a spoon or a mug or a bucket. You have to call fire brigade. You have to use all the measures, and you have very less time in hand. It is only 2 hours. So while we are treating PPH, most of the time it is one and the other. You just start with, if you have opened the abdomen, see that you do uterine artery ligation. If it doesn't do, go for stepney down, go for ovarian, go for V-lange, go for internal iliac. Just keep on doing it one after the other if it is not working for you, because you don't have time. And I've seen many patients who just keep on doing the massage and they keep on shouting blood lao, blood lao, blood lao, blood lao, and patient ko bolo, call the patient for hysterectomy, consent. No, you have to be very careful. There have been many litigations in which you have done hysterectomies and the patient party has questioned your treatment protocol, that why all the methods recommended by WHO were not tried in her. So documentation is very important. You need to have a person who has to write down every little thing you are doing. Every little thing has to be mentioned. And remember, you need good amount of blood. You should know how to calculate it. 3.5 liters. Initially, it is 2 liters of crystalloids. You should be, 1 to 1.5 liters of colloids. You need fresh blood. You have to compensate the fresh blood. If you are given 4 units of Paxil, you have to give 4 units of FFP. Monitor her platelets, monitor her fibrinogen level, and I'm sure that all of us can, through small efforts, we can bring a lot of change in reducing the maternal mortality in our country. And with this, I finish my talk, and I'm so thankful to all of you for being such patient listeners. And thank you once again to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rekha. That was an extremely, extremely crisp and comprehensive coverage of this very vast topic. We have a few questions by the audience. I think most of the questions you've already covered in your talk, but just a few pending ones that I would like to you to answer. There's a question that does hydration during first and second stage of labor reduce atonic PPH?
Uh, a patient has to be hydrated well, not too much, not too less also. But yes, I have seen, it is absolutely correct. I have seen patients in labor room where a drip is going on, a syntocinon drip is going on, and infusion rate is there like 6 or 12, and no other fluid is going. They are deeply dehydrated. We never try to consider this as an important aspect, but yes, she has to be well hydrated, and it can be a precursor. Yes.
Yes, and I think I would like to add here that if the patient is well hydrated, she will be able to tolerate the blood loss better.
Actually, yes, 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 yes,
So
yes,
it does not
yes.
actually prevent PPH, but makes her more tolerant to the blood loss. I think that is what is important. The
Yes.
questions were the role of tranexamic acid and role of factor 7. I think you've already covered this. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is the ideal time to repeat hemoglobin and hematocrit after PPH.
See, if the PPH has stopped, then definitely you give 24 hours for it. But yes, if patient is bleeding, there is no fun if your patient has not stopped bleeding and you ask the blood bank or the pathologist to tell you how much is the bleeding, or how much she is bleeding. But yes, as soon as you feel that patient is bleeding, I told you, you have to take 20 ml of blood and immediately send, and definitely you can repeat it after 4 hours to begin with. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. There was another question of role of intrauterine balloons for the management of PPH. You've already covered that, so we're not going to go into that. There's a question on the maximum dose of oxytocin for the treatment of PPH.
See, the maximum dose which WHO has recommended is 10 international units only. They say that 10 international units bolus. In fact, till yesterday or before preparing my slide, I was also following 2012 WHO recommendations, and we would be using 10 international units intramuscular. Then we were putting 20 international units in the drip, in the infusion, and then we were increasing the drips to 40 international units in the infusion, and we were just carrying on. But WHO says IV bolus 10 international units are to be given immediately. If it doesn't work, you have to definitely add. I went through few studies which said that if you give 10 international units bolus, and then you put around 40 international units in the infusion and continue it for 4 hours, it can help in maintaining the effect. But WHO has not said anything about that.
Okay, yeah, ma'am. I would also like to add that maximum dose for the antenatal patient, it is, when we are doing induction, it is usually mentioned as 84 milli international units. But for PPH, there is no maximum dose as such mentioned anywhere. But yes, you can give a maintenance dose. We usually give it for say like 3 VACs over 24 hours, each containing 20 units, 20
Yes.
units, and then 10 units.
Yes.
Usual practice that we can do.
Yeah.
Next question, madam, for you is the role of carboprost in treatment of PPH, as it is still being used in many centers.
Yeah, somehow carboprost, I love that drug, especially if I am doing a cesarean section. 250 micrograms of carboprost intramyometrial is really handy. You really come to know the tone because it is in your hand, you are using it. It is a good drug, but you can use it every 15 minutes, as it has been mentioned, up to 8 doses, I think they have been mentioned. So carboprost, yes, it is a good drug, but not for prevention, but yes, for management of PPH, it has been recommended.
Ma'am, I would agree with you that it is a good drug. But to just share my practical experience, I think that is the reason that WHO also doesn't recommend it now, because carboprost gives a lot of side effects in the form of vomiting and
Yes.
diarrhea.
Yeah,
And a patient who has already lost blood due to PPH, this diarrhea can be an additional volume loss.
Yes.
That becomes a problem. We have faced situations where the patient was, there was insistent diarrhea, and there was a lot of problem in managing the fluid. We could not overload the patient because she was a pre-eclamptic. We could not give her more fluids, how to maintain that input-output. So that becomes a problem. So it is not a preferred drug, but yes, it may be used if your other measures fail. That is what my personal opinion. The next question, madam, is that after how much time should we go for surgical management?
There is no time. Actually, if one thing is not working, you have to rush to the second stage. If second stage is not working, you have to rush to third. Third stage is not working, you have to rush towards so 30 minutes is enough. 30 is enough. If it is not working, you have to open her up. Because you can really save her life. You can really save her life if it is atonic PPH. By doing these modified B-Lynch and these ligations, you can actually save her life.
Yeah, we'll move on to the next session.
Yeah,
we are running short of time. Like we are
thank
already.
you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It was a wonderful session with a lot of questions, because it's a very important topic.
Yeah.
But we are short of time. So thank you, madam, for a wonderful session. It was so thought-provoking. And I would like to invite our second speaker, Dr. Purnima Jaydev, to give a talk on conduct of labor in this COVID-19 pandemic. Because everything has come to a halt in this COVID-19, but deliveries and obstetric practice cannot be put on hold. So that is the Dr. Purnima will elaborate on how to go about this. Dr. Purnima is a acclaimed teacher. She joined government service in the year 1991, and she has worked in various PHCs and hospitals. She's worked as a clinical coordinator for KMC Mangalore. She's a master trainer in IUCD and PPIUCD, resource person for POSCO Act, PCP NDT Act, training involved in training of ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers, and has given talks in Akashvani television channels, and conducted laparoscopic camps in various rural areas. So it's our great fortune to have such an acclaimed speaker to talk about such a pertinent issue in today's time. Dr. Purnima, please. Dr. Purnima, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Dr. Purnima, unmute yourself. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can you? You can hear?
Yes, madam.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be with you all in this COVID-19 pandemic. We have been through this for almost 6 months now. You all know that this disease was identified first in the Wuhan city of China in December 2019. That is why it is called COVID-19. And WHO on 13 March 2020 characterized COVID-19 as pandemic. By that time, Italy and America and other countries, and now more than 200 countries worldwide are having COVID-19. Whether you do lockdown or stay at home or you do social distancing, you cannot stop deliveries. You can just postpone only the antenatal checkup. And I've seen many obstetricians stop their practice in this COVID-19, and many hospitals, private nursing homes doesn't want to take pregnant women. So where these pregnant women will go for deliveries? Government took the burden of delivering all these patients. I know how much difficult it was for Lady Goshen Hospital, Wenlock Hospital at Mangalore. And I'm at least fortunate to be here in Bangalore now. And I now work in Jayanagara General Hospital. We are having 300-bed hospital. Out of that, 120 beds are for COVID-19 patients. We have dedicated 120 beds, not for pregnant women. And all the pregnant positive ladies will go to either Victoria Hospital or to Lady Goshen Hospital in Bangalore. And some COVID-19 dedicated hospitals are identified. So all our patients will go there. And total number of deliveries from March to September in our hospital is around 2,741. Out of that, we had 87 at term, and total number of positive deliveries done vaginally is 3 because we couldn't do the examination before, and it was done during the admission, and after delivery, the results were positive.
Excuse me, madam. You share your slides, no?
Yeah, you're not coming?
No, it's not come. You have to share my slides, no?
Yeah, I got into that.
Share my screen, madam.
Yeah. It is not coming?
No.
Open her PPT.
Yeah. Share the screen.
1 minute.
And, open your PPT, madam.
Yes.
And start slideshow like that.
Only this is coming, not coming?
No, madam, your face is in, that's all.
Okay. Sorry. No, I'm unable to do that.
Share my screen anta kodi, madam.
Share my screen.
Ma'am, on the bottom of the screen, you can see the green option, share screen. You have to click on that. And then your PPT, which you have minimized, you maximize it and start your screen sharing. First, you click on the green option, ma'am, share screen. At the bottom of your screen, you will find it. Bottom or top.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I cannot see.
Madam, double click on your screen, madam. Then you'll see green. PPT is open on your computer, madam. PPT.
Yes.
Now you double click on your screen, madam. In the center of the screen, just double click.
Yeah.
Now you are seeing the green share screen option is there. Green color.
No.
Down, madam. Down in the just about bottom bar box. Sometimes top it will come. Sometimes down it will come.
No, I'm not getting.
Another option is, ma'am, you can email the presentation to one of the organizers who can share the screen. That's an option.
Madam, you can mail your PPT to us.
Now?
Yeah.
We'll start with the next speaker.
We'll start with the next speaker.
We'll have your session.
Okay.
Next session will take you, madam.
Okay.
Mail ಮಾಡಿ madam.
Okay, ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ.
Namaste. Next co-speaker ಬರ್ತಾರೆ, coordinator. Namaste. ಇಲ್ಲ, I know him.
Right, so that was a little technical glitch, but we'll be back with Dr. Poornima's session in just a while. For the next session, I invite Dr. Virendra Kumar. Sir is a professor and unit head at BMS Bellary. Has a teaching experience of 20 years. He's the president of Bellary Obgyn Society for the year 2019 to 21. He has contributed many chapters in textbooks and monograms. He has around 100 presentations in various CMEs and conferences. He is the chief coordinator for Wisdom 2008 to 11 and organized MUSCON live workshops and CMEs, has various publications to his credit, and he was the organizing secretary for KSOGA 2019 Bellary. And sir is going to speak a very pertinent topic of breech delivery, that is, kind of a dying art, and which needs to be revived. We feel very, very strongly about this. And sir is going to deal how confident are we in conducting breech deliveries. And I'm sure the audience is going to benefit by the wisdom of sir. So the stage is all yours, Virendra sir.
Thank you, madam, for the nice introduction. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to Dr. Geeta and MUJ KGB Medical College Sulya for giving me an opportunity to talk on this very important topic. Yeah, just 1 minute.
It is coming, sir. Carry on, sir.
Yeah. Can you see the presentation now? 1 minute.
No, sir.
No.
No. Yeah.
No, sir.
Now? Can you see the presentation now?
Yeah, open your PPT, sir.
Open the PPT.
Yeah, I'll open.
Share the screen. You
Open the
your
PPT.
PPT, sir.
Can you see it now?
No, sir, not yet.
Open the PPT, sir. Open the PPT.
Yeah, I opened actually.
Okay. You have to share the screen, sir. Only PPT.
Can you see now?
Sir, you have to minimize it
Okay, I have minimized.
and then
Resume
open.
sharing.
Minimize the Zoom screen, sir. Then open the Zoom, then share your screen through the Zoom, sir.
Yes.
Can you see now?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Now
sir.
make it full screen, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
Yes,
we
sir.
can see you, sir.
you can see. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Exactly 22 years back, as a junior resident, I had broken a femur of a breech fetus. Okay, then I was very guilty. Then my teacher, Dr. Sugna Joshi, later on consoled me, and he took a class on breech for 4 hours in bedside clinics. Another incident, we had a patient wherein the dangling fetus was referred to us. By forcibly, the outside practitioner had decapitated the baby, and head was inside the uterine cavity. Then we had to do cesarean section for an aftercoming head, which was decapitated in the uterine cavity. These are all the horrifying incidents. So that's why we need to know about breech delivery. Once upon a time, we had a patient who was presenting with a breech with the dangling body in between the thighs of the patient, and the obstetrician did not know how to conduct the delivery because the head was very big. Then she came to us in the medical college. We simple perforation of the posterior fontanelle did the magic, and patient delivered within 2 minutes. Clinicians have long recognized that there is going to be increased mortality and morbidity associated with breech presentation. The master obstetrician, F. Morrissey, he told that, just wait for a minute, I am seeing some chart box in front of my screen. Yeah. The master Morrissey told several unnatural postures wherein the child presents themselves at their birth are the cause of most of the bad labors and accidents, for which usually recourse is to head to chirurgeons. This was told in 17th century. Then Paul Portal, he said, if the feet of the child comes foremost, you must take care to baptize them immediately. That means we have to do cesarean section for footling presentation. Rolf Wright, way back in 1959, he said, any patient of more than 35 weeks of gestation who entered labor in breech presentation should be born by cesarean section, provided there are no contraindication for cesarean delivery. Over the last 50 years, there has been a phenomenal shift in clinical practice from breech birth to cesarean section. Worldwide, the vast majority of breech babies are now delivered by planned cesarean section. Breech presentation, what we should understand is the mode of delivery will not increase or decrease perinatal mortality. The breech presentation themselves has got a high risk of mortality compared to cephalic presentation because of higher incidence of congenital anomalies, birth asphyxia, birth injury, and most importantly, prematurity. Rate of cord prolapse in non-frank presentation is also more in breech presentations. Sadly, nowadays, we are, for each and everything, the young obstetricians think that cesarean section is the answer. This is like using cesarean section as a hammer. If the only tool you have is a hammer, you tend to see every patient as a candidate for cesarean section. This does not hold good for breech delivery because we need to revive the art of breech delivery, vaginal breech delivery. The art, of course, medical science, we call it as obstetric science, is particularly an art. The art should not be allowed to die. The technique of vaginal breech deliveries will remain integral component of obstetric practice because cesarean section may be inadvisable or not feasible in many patients. Many women may opt for vaginal breech delivery. There are still unresolved issues regarding the best practice of delivering preterm breech and breech presentation, especially in multiple pregnancies. Some women may come in advanced labor when there is no time to do cesarean section or the facility for doing cesarean section may not be there. So we should know about breech delivery, whether you like it or not. Learning the art of vaginal delivery, especially breech delivery, is essential. Cesarean breech delivery also demands a clear knowledge of the same maneuvers which are used in vaginal breech delivery. Gimowski, in his famous article, says, in fact, a poorly performed breech delivery during a cesarean results in injuries similar or more than that sustained during vaginal delivery. The injuries may be like brachial plexus injuries, bony fractures, spinal cord injury, or crush injury to the viscera. Hence, even though you don't want to conduct vaginal delivery, but you must know the maneuvers. My teacher, Dr. Swegna Joshi, used to say that delivery of breech is like delivering an inverted triangle. If you deliver a cephalic presentation, it's an upright triangle wherein the most broadest part, incompressible part, delivers first and very easy to deliver the apex. Whereas it is not so in case of breech delivery. Here you are delivering inverted triangle. The base of the inverted triangle is more, especially in preterm babies or extremely premature babies. That's why, as the picture says, here 3 triangles are there. The first triangle is less than 33 weeks. The middle triangle is between 33 to 38 weeks, and the last triangle is a term. The relation between bitrochanteric, bisacromial, and BPD is more favorable near term. That's why they advocate doing cesarean section for between 26 to 34 weeks because of this relation, because increasingly there may be difficulty of delivery, especially after coming head. So in this talk, I am not going to much elaborate on the techniques. I'm going to touch upon the techniques, and also we will critically analyze the infamous or famous term breach trial. Diagnosis of breach is very important. Sometimes what is seen in the ultrasound may change because of spontaneous version when the patient comes in labor. So routinely we must use Holland's maneuver. In our PG style, in the examination they tell Leopold maneuver. But in practice, actually what we are doing is Holland's maneuver. Whenever patient comes, suddenly put our hand on the abdomen to know what is there in the lower pole. So this is called as Holland's maneuver. 95 to 97 presentations are cephalic. So hence we should use Holland's maneuver in the first setting rather than Leopold maneuver, which is ritualistically told in the examination. Frank breach, especially the extended legs are splinted against the head, and the compact breach in the pelvis may be confused to vertex presentation. Vaginal examination, dilatation is tardy, bag waters unusually elongated, and irregularly fetal parts may be felt. This may be a clue towards diagnosis of breach examination. Especially the ultrasound may not be always be available. During labor, swollen face may be confused with breach. Absence of gum ridge in the anus with rule out face, and drips when ruling out shoulder. These are all very practical points. This must be taught to our all junior resident, not to miss breach or to miss shoulder presentation. Blunder is to mistake a shoulder for breach. The mechanism of labor in breach is more complex compared to cephalic presentation. Attitude of the fetus as well as attitude of the obstetrician is definitely matters in vaginal breech delivery. As all of you know, bitrochanteric diameter is the diameter of engagement. Internal rotation of breech, shoulders, and head should occur, whereas it is not of much consequence in cephalic presentation. Here, lateral flexion occurs, whereas the flexion occurs in cephalic presentation at the cervical vertebrae. Here, the flexion occurs lumbar vertebrae. It may be problematic in frank breech because of the splinting action. The prognosis of vaginal breech delivery, maternal risk is same that of vertex. Increased chance of perineal injuries, especially in primigravidae. Perinatal morbidity and mortality is high, which is not just related to mode of delivery. It is also the inherent problem of the breech also contributes to increased perinatal morbidity. Increased death rate is seen in breech presentation. The autopsy of stillborn fetuses and early neonatal death revealed 75% of the cases had intracranial hemorrhage. No time for molding of the head because too rapid delivery of the aftercoming head. It is called as Cork-Champagne effect. It leads to tentorial rupture, tentorial tears, so that there is intracranial hemorrhage. Head compression is more dangerous in breech delivery than cord compression. Most of us think that cord compression will lead to death of the fetus. It is not so. Head compression leads to most often death of the fetus. Birth asphyxia due to long delay in delivery, and cervical dislocation of spine and rupture of the liver can occur during breech delivery. And indication for cesarean section, I don't want to elaborate. Most pertinent to doing C-section for breech delivery are prolapse of the umbilical cord, especially in footling breech, small babies or large babies, hyperection of the fetal head, and footling presentation. These are the indication for doing cesarean section in breech. The trial of labor should be considered after weighing the pros and cons and ruling out high risk parameters in the patient. Frank or complete breech, the gestation age should be ideally between 36 to 42 weeks. The weight should be between 2.5 to 4 kgs. Flexed or neutral fetal head, adequate maternal pelvis, and there should not be any contraindication. So to know whether baby is flexed or neutral fetal head, usage of intrapartum ultrasound is mandatory, especially if you want to conduct vaginal breech delivery. So conditions for trial of labor in breech deliveries: adequate descent of breech must occur. No heroic vaginal procedures are performed. Here, your ego should not work. You must have willingness to abandon the procedure, and there must be facilities to immediately perform cesarean section. Induction of labor is not recommended for breech presentation from practical point of view. A trained professional in neonatal resuscitation should be attendance at the time of delivery. An experienced obstetrician in vaginal delivery should be present at delivery. The problem is nowadays we don't have obstetricians which are highly trained or highly experienced in vaginal breech delivery, thanks to the infamous term breech trial. So I want to talk about management of uncomplicated breech and management of complicated breech. What do you mean by uncomplicated breech? Here, no complications occur, like no nuchal arm, no impaction of the breech. So here, leave things strictly to the nature and intervene only to assist the birth of the shoulders under the aftercoming head. The delivery maneuvers by the clinicians are performed only in the final stage of expulsion. Fetus should be positioned so that back is always anterior. Untimely interference such as breech extraction lead to greater difficulty in extracting the head. In fact, there is no role for breech extraction whenever you are planning to conduct vaginal breech delivery, unless there is a complication or an emergency. So we routinely ask assisted breech delivery, whether it is a the multi or primi, this should be the step. We should not allow the fetus to deliver spontaneously. Assisted breech delivery is the mandatory when you are planning for vaginal breech delivery. So whenever I ask what is assisted breech delivery, many fail to tell the answers, and here is the answer. The assisted breech delivery is series of gentle, unhurried, deliberate maneuvers so as to effect the delivery of shoulders and aftercoming head without much damage to the fetus and mother. So it is a series of gentle, unhurried, and deliberate maneuvers so as to effect the delivery of shoulders. That is assisted breech delivery. The best policy for successful delivery of breech is no interference except episiotomy until the body is born to the umbilicus, and hard bearing down and expulsive efforts by the mother during contraction, and the maintenance of suprapubic pressure during descent to aid deliver and keep the head in flexion. Once the umbilicus has been delivered, time becomes an important factor. The remainder of the birth is expedited gently and skillfully, as I told earlier. A free airway to the mouth should be available, and within 3 to 5 minutes to obviate anoxic brain damage. The 3 to 5 minutes is a hell of a time. Definitely, you no need to hurry, but at the same time, there should not be undue prolongation. Then management of complicated breech. The arrest of buttocks at the brim may occur. In such situation, it's better to recourse to cesarean section than doing heroic procedures. However, situation may arise such that you may encounter a situation wherein buttocks may get stuck at pelvic outlet. Here, extension of the leg is the commonest reason, as splinted legs prevent lateral flexion and wedges formed by head, shoulder, and legs is too large to enter the brain. Breech extraction, I told there is no role for breech extraction in modern obstetrics. Probably the only role of breech extraction in modern obstetrics is delivery of a second twin. It requires considerable skill and should never be attempted by an inexperienced surgeon. Should be a smooth and slow operation with an assistant always providing continuous fundal pressure as well as suprapubic pressure to give cranial flexion. As I told earlier, I am not going to much tell in detail about the maneuvers. Here the topic is how confident are we. So it becomes important factor on my part to discuss about TBT. The decomposition, if you are encountering the complete breech and you are not able to deliver the legs, the decomposition of the breech should occur. One should insert the hand inside and catch hold of the foot, and it must be, the hip must be adducted, and then the foot is drawn out. That is called as decomposition of the breech. Suppose if you encounter extended breech, then you have to perform Pinot's maneuver. The decomposition of breech occurs in flexed breech, that is complete breech, wherein there is flexion both at hip as well as knee joint. You have to catch hold of the foot and draw it across the body, especially hip must be adducted. If you come across extended breech, you must perform Pinot's maneuver. Here the hand is inserted and over the popliteal fossa, the gentle upward and backward. Here you are going to do abduction, slight abduction. Once you perform abduction, there will be definitely flexion of the knee joint and you can catch hold of the foot and you can decompose as I explained earlier. This is called as Pinot's maneuver. Lauset's maneuver. Here the principle of Lauset's maneuver is that because of the inclination of the pelvis, when we ask Lauset's maneuver principle, my students start answering about the methodology. I am not interested in methodology. I am going to ask what is the principle. The principle here is because of the inclination of the pelvis and the hollow sacral bay, posterior shoulder will always be below the brim. This method does not involve any intravaginal or intrauterine manipulation. If performed correctly and gently, it will not entail any risk to the fetus and mother. So as I told earlier, because of inclination, always posterior shoulder is below the brim. You turn the baby by 180 degree, definitely the posterior shoulder will be below the symphysis pubis and very easy to deliver the shoulder. The another problem which may come across is nuchal arm. Here, excessive traction may further complicate. Once you suspect nuchal arm wherein you are not able to deliver the arm, the correct treatment is to rotate the fetus in the direction in which the hand is pointing. The occiput slips past the foam and friction of the rotation causes the shoulder and elbow to flex and become accessible for delivery. So this is the nuchal arm. The hand is pointing towards the left. You turn the baby towards that direction and naturally the arm can be easily delivered. Again, there must be sweeping of the arm across the chest. If you don't follow this rule, you are likely to break the humerus. You must always sweep the arm across the chest and that means you have to perform adduction. Only in Pinot's maneuver, you are going to abduct because your aim is to flex the knee joint. Whereas in delivering the decomposing the leg in a complete breech or delivering the arm across the chest, as in case of delivery of the arm, should always follow adduction rather than abduction. Otherwise, you will break the humerus or femur. Fetal head entrapment during vaginal delivery is an obstetric emergency. After coming head, again I tell, attitude matters. Taggidavanu baliyanu ante. So whenever there is after coming head difficulty is there, you must maintain flexion of the fetus. Here, by constantly applying suprapubic pressure, otherwise which is called as Christopher's maneuver, you are going to present subrachmatic diameter to engage so that it is less than 10 centimeter. If the fetus shows the attitude, hyperextension attitude, then it becomes increasingly difficult and such fetuses may die. So in the delivery of the breech, you must always maintain flexion. Again, after coming head, so many maneuvers are there. Wiegand-Martin is there, wherein the same obstetrician, Akosher, uses his dominant hand and non-dominant hand to deliver. In Morris-Mewes-Smith delivery, both dominant and non-dominants are used to deliver the baby, whereas assistant applies suprapubic pressure. And another method which all of you are familiar is Burns-Marshall method. Fetus is allowed to hang. Once the nape of the neck is seen, the grasp in between the feet and swept in wide arc over the maternal abdomen. In preference to Burns-Marshall method, most of the textbooks, guidelines and professional bodies actually advocate Morris-Mewes-Smith method in preference to Burns-Marshall method. In Morris-Mewes-Smith method, fetus is placed in a horse riding position across the non-dominant hand. The two fingers should be placed over the molar prominences to maintain the flexion of the fetus. And the middle finger should not be inserted inside the mouth. You must use your two fingers over molar eminence to promote flexion of the fetus. The middle finger of the dominant hand should be put on the fetal occiput to promote flexion, and the index and ring fingers on each of the fetal shoulders to promote traction. So here the word of caution is you should not put your hand inside the mouth of the fetus, otherwise you may cause damage to the fetus. So after coming head, the first application of the forceps for after coming head was in fact advocated by Mauricio. However, it was popularized by Pipers. If you have Pipers forceps, it is best to use Pipers forceps for delivery of the after coming head. Sometimes, as I told earlier, always you must try to keep the back of the baby anteriorly. Sometimes there may be a situation wherein you may come across the abdomen may be anterior. In such a situation, you must use PROG method. There may be a situation wherein you have allowed preterm babies or non-viable fetuses for vaginal deliveries. The most common complication which may occur in such cases is incompletely dilated cervix. If the head fails to deliver despite additional maneuvers, then consideration should be towards performing cervical incisions. These are known as Duherson's incisions. Incision is taken at 2 and 10 o'clock position, and most of the times the cervix yields and can be delivered easily. And sometimes, if necessary, the additional incision may be taken at 6 o'clock position, so that you are avoiding injury to the descending cervical artery. If performed incorrectly, or if it is not your day, the cervical incision may extend upwards within the broad ligament and may cause hematoma. Sometimes you may come across a patient, you know that already baby is abnormal, baby has hydrocephalus, and patient comes in labor with the dangling body in between the thighs. If you know that it is hydrocephalus, you must not perform reverse Giovanelli method and do cesarean section. Very simple procedure, just perforate the posterior fontanelle, the CSF is drained and skull collapses and it can be easily delivered. It looks like a miracle for especially young residents, junior resident, if they see such maneuver. Sometimes you may get a baby hydrocephalus, there may be spina bifida lesion in the spine. So then instead of perforating the posterior fontanelle, you may insert a draining catheter through the spina bifida defect, or you can do spondylotomy. Just if it is a communicating hydrocephalus, all the CSF drains. So in such cases, definitely one must not perform cesarean section. Otherwise, as I told in the beginning, an anecdote wherein after coming head, a patient, we had to do cesarean section because it was decapitated because of the excessive traction by the private practitioner. So then comes the famous or infamous term breach trial. Term breach trial research has turned breech birth around. Last 50 years, there has been a phenomenal shift, not only due to TBT, I'm just talking about the landmark at the research. Last 50 years, there has been a phenomenal shift in clinical practice from vaginal birth to cesarean section because of the increasing safety, because of the new emerging indication for doing cesarean section. Now, world is moving towards cesarean delivery for most of the cases. Now, worldwide, vast majority of the breech babies are now delivered by planned cesarean section. Realistically, the trials publication, despite the deficiencies, have accelerated the trend to cesarean section for breech deliveries almost to the point of no return. This is very sad thing as far as obstetrics is concerned. Even before term breech trial, many voted with their scalpels. Many used to advocate cesarean section for breech deliveries. Trial results, critical medico-legal climate in the present scenario further consolidated this approach of doing cesarean section for breech. National guidelines, you look for any ACOG guidelines, RCOG guidelines, Canadian guidelines, French guidelines, they write specified, especially fully informed consent, further hardened the resolve of the women to opt for planned cesarean delivery. If you tell all the complication, suppose your baby's head may get entrapped, if I don't deliver within 3 minutes, it may die. If you tell such complication, no woman will give her consent for vaginal breech delivery. So the national guidelines, the trial results, the critical medical legal litigant people are pushing us to perform cesarean section for most of the cases. So this is the famous article, that is Lancet, Hannah et al. Planned cesarean section versus planned vaginal birth breech presentation at term, a randomized multi-centric trial. It was published in the Lancet, October 21, 2000. So a brief information about TBT, term breech trial, a multi-center trial of planned cesarean section versus planned vaginal birth. It was undertaken at 121 centers, including both developing and developed countries, involving 26 countries. Initially, it required a sample size of 2,800 women with a singleton fetus in a frank or complete breech presentation. Following an interim analysis of 1,600 women recruited, the Independent Data Monitoring Committee recommended recruitment to be stopped early owing to a significant higher event rate than expected, because they noted the higher mortality rate, perinatal mortality rate in the vaginal arm of the group. And the study concluded that there was no difference in maternal morbidity between the groups. However, there was statistically significant increase in perinatal mortality in planned vaginal birth deliveries. What is the impact of term breech trial? Within a few months of term breech trial, had transformed obstetric practice worldwide. Within 2 months following publication of the term breech trials, the overall cesarean section rate for breech presentation in Holland is reported to have increased from 50% to 80% within 2 months. Just say 2 months. Rarely in medical history have the results of a single research study so profoundly changed practice. This was told by Glezeman in 2006. He was one of the collaborators of TBT trial. He owes its such a change in the attitude towards TBT. In New South Wales, Australia, the rate of vaginal birth declined from 17% in 1992 to 14% in 2000 and to 4.5% in 2001. That was the impact of term breech trial. New Zealand, 72% offering vaginal breech delivery prior to the publication of the TBT. After this rate declined to 20%. 80 centers in 23 countries reported a 92.5% change rate in clinical practice to planned breech babies. Again, ACOG committee is always a fence sitter. In the opinion, the interim update of 2018, it says the number of practitioners with the skills and experience to perform vaginal delivery has decreased. This is the statement by ACOG. Even in academic medical centers, where faculty, example medical colleges, where faculty support for teaching vaginal delivery to residents remains high, there may be insufficient volume of vaginal deliveries to adequately teach this procedure. This is the statement by ACOG as latest as August 2018. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists Committee on Obstetrics Practice recommended that planned vaginal delivery of a term singleton breacher was no longer appropriate. This was the statement in 2001. Planned vaginal delivery of a term singleton breech, it says in its opinion, may be reasonable under hospital specific protocol guidelines for both eligibility and labor management. I am just giving the evidence so as to know how the evidence, the litigant world has shattered our experience and confidence in conducting vaginal deliveries. The decision regarding in 2018 recommendation, the decision regarding the mode of delivery should depend on the experience of the obstetric care provider. Where is the experience? Cesarean delivery will be the preferred mode of delivery for most physicians because of diminishing expertise in vaginal breech delivery. Obstetricians should offer and perform external cephalic version wherever possible. All these statements are only for most of the times theoretical consequences because world has embraced TBT trial without critically analyzing it. In those instances in which breech vaginal deliveries are pursued, great caution should be exercised and detailed patient informed consent should be documented. Just look at these sentences. It's really horrifying if you want to really practice evidence-based medicine. Before embarking on a plan for a vaginal breech delivery, women should be informed of perinatal and neonatal mortality or short-term serious neonatal morbidity may be higher if cesarean delivery is planned. Planned vaginal delivery of a term singleton breech may be reasonable under highly specific protocol guidelines for both eligibility and labor management. So we are practicing in the shadow of TBT. When the TBT were being published, many experienced clinicians urged caution in accepting studies' initial outcome. However, it was like a cry in the forest. It is in Kannada, it is called as Aranyarodha, and nobody listened to them. And even the interim analysis by the same group in 2 years follow-up was reassuring. They told that there was no difference in major outcomes in respect to death or neurodevelopmental delay, both in planned cesarean and in planned vaginal delivery. They themselves accepted that there is no change in the long-term outcome. However, the world had moved very fast and nobody bothered to see this outcome. So time has told a different story. However, the trend to deliver term singleton breech presentation by cesarean section has continued unabated. Now, in 2002, Grant J. in his BJOG, he says, he critically analyzed the evidence of TBT. TBT and its aftermath is a prime example of how the evidence itself can be put on trial. The term breech trial is an example of a randomized trial that was impeccable as regards its methodological design. It was very nicely designed, but it was questionable regards its clinical design. Now, after nearly 12 years of TBT, Gerald Lawson, he writes an article, the term breech trial 10 years on, primum non nocere, means first do no harm. Ever since TBT trials were accepted without any questioning or without much applying our wisdom, many deaths have occurred during cesarean section. To prevent perinatal death, many women have lost their life because of the inherent complication of surgery. So we have obsession with randomized control trial. Randomized control trial have got better evidence or better methodology compared to other studies. However, if RCT is poorly monitored, it can become a fishing expedition in which every conceivable results may be included, however irrelevant, and that disconnected adverse outcomes may be included in the final analysis. In the TBT trial, they say like must be compared with like. You cannot compare third world scenario with the advanced country scenario. Many centers of the TBT trial did not have ultrasound and CTG, and 40% of the centers had no access to USG. So that's why in the beginning of my talk, I told that intrapartum usage of ultrasound is mandatory if you are planning for vaginal breech delivery, because you may ignore hyperextended head and ultimately the fetus may die because of the inherent problem of the fetus rather than the mode of the delivery. Many of the perinatal deaths which occurred in term breech trial had no relation to mode of delivery. There was an issue with quality control in the term breech trial. Protocol violations were aplenty, but the results were included in final analysis. Like it said in the beginning, singleton pregnancies will be included. However, in their report, they tell about 10 cases of term breech wherein they had twins. So live baby, 5 cases were recruited when the baby was already dead inside. And 7% of the cases, they did not have experienced skill provider. Even though trial was planned, many women, because they say planned vaginal delivery breech versus planned cesarean section. However, many women entered the labor, the group when they were in labor. So Anna et al. Had no concern for such violations. However, they commented in the end of their result that there was exceptional compliance for this study. The degree of experience and training of the accoucheur appeared to be highly variable because it was 26 countries and 121 centers. It was very difficult to monitor the quality of the obstetric care provided. The enrollment of women had to be ad hoc rather than consecutive, leading to selection bias. Units unable to provide emergency cesarean delivery within 1 hour were also included, which was again protocol violation or providing substandard care to women. There was bizarre prediction by the TURN-BREACH trial authors. They claimed that only 7 extra cesarean are needed to prevent a death in one death in low resource with low PNMR settings. However, it was debunked by the Dutch study. They concluded that it would take either 175 or 320 cesarean section to prevent one perinatal death. That means the TBT authors were prejudiced or their methodology was definitely flawed. So TBT trial, many of the critics tell that it is like politics, full of compromises, but no confessions. There was recruitment bias, there was protocol violation, flawed analysis of the results, prejudiced opinion about the outcome of the study, and most importantly, fast tracking of the publication. If you send any of your article for publication, especially international reputed journals like BJOG, Lancet, it will take minimum 2 years to get published. However, the results of the TBT were published within 6 months of stopping the trial, in spite of prematurely stopping the TURN-BREACH trial. Again, systematic analysis was done. It was published in 2014 RCOG. The risk of planned vaginal breech delivery versus planned cesarean section for TURN-BREACH birth, a meta-analysis, including observational studies. The conclusion says perinatal mortality and morbidity in the planned vaginal breech delivery were significantly higher than the planned cesarean delivery. However, in the same article, they say that relative risk RR may be more with vaginal breech delivery, but they say that the actual risk with vaginal delivery is low. I don't understand what is the meaning of this. And in the final analysis, they say instead of conducting a comparative study on planned vaginal breech versus planned cesarean section, they are advocating a comparative study of vaginal breech versus vaginal cephalic delivery. That means the professional bodies themselves are professional bodies themselves are not confident on their statements. So everybody knows about TURN-BREACH trial, or sometimes we have to ask PGs what is TBT. Even many of them do not know what is TBT. However, many of us or many of the students do not know about PREMODA study. PREMODA study is presentation and mode of delivery study, analyzed over 8,000 deliveries. It was almost 4 times the number of TURN-BREACH trial. Interestingly, this study did not find any significant excess risk associated with planned vaginal delivery. It was published in American Journal of Obstetrics Gynecology by Goffinet et al. It did not find, contrary to the findings of TURN-BREACH trial, PREMODA study, and this is more reassuring because it gives confidence to conduct vaginal delivery. Preventing breech births. So ACOG also recommends you perform ECV. Instead of allowing for breech delivery, you convert breech into cephalic. So alternative methods is external cephalic version. Even though it is not a part of my this, just for the sake of completion, I am mentioning this external cephalic version. And moxibustion therapy can be used as preventive ways to decrease incidence of breech presentation. The one word about moxibustion therapy is it is a Chinese herb extract. The dried leaves compacted and rolled like a cigar is lit and burned at a specific acupuncture point of bladder on the outer corner of the little toe of each feet. So this is the moxibustion therapy, and the partner, the husband, may be trained to do this thing, and it is used in Chinese medicine. Used in Chinese medicine for centuries, and they claim the success rate of 85 to 90%. However, there is insufficient evidence to support this.